Hi, my name is John Bloomfield and I'm an independent financial advisor. As I'm at home at the moment with this coronavirus issue, I thought I might take a little bit of time to make a couple of videos about some basic principles of financial planning, how you can apply them in your life, etc., to give yourself a solid financial foundation. The sort of thing that people say should be taught in school but isn't, and I regularly come across people who don't really have these concepts. So I'll be with you in a moment. This might be the first of many videos, or it might be the only video. If you're a keen observer, you'll notice during that little title sequence I have obtained a cup of tea. It's got nothing to do with the lesson and it's not a test. I just like to have a cup of tea. Right, so the first thing that I want to talk about is the first step in financial planning and managing your finances is not about trying to build wealth, it's about trying to build financial stability. You can build financial stability and ultimately long-term wealth through the principle of pay yourself first. Now, you've probably heard of this principle. If you haven't, it simply means that you allocate a certain percentage of your income that you want to keep. From everything you receive, everything you get in, that you want to keep that percentage, and it has to be realistic. We normally say 10% is the target, particularly in the early days of managing your finances. There's lots of complications with this, depending on where you are in your personal financial life, that I'll come to at the end. But essentially, the principle is, every month you get paid, you want to retain 10% of that income to put away towards your financial security and ultimately build wealth. So, obviously you know how much you bring home every month. If you don't, look at your payslip, look at your bank statement, and you need 10% of that. So you have to know where you're at and whether this is affordable for you at this point in time. You need to budget. You need to not create a budget, but look at how you already spend your money. We use, when we're helping clients, a sheet that it's just a memory prompt. You can have a copy of this if you want one. It just lists things that most people spend money on every month. But what I would suggest is you can do this with a piece of A4 paper. You just go through your bank statements, you write down everything you spent in the last couple of months, and you put it into categories. So ultimately there are two types of expenses. There are discretionary expenses and committed expenses. A committed expense is something that you have to pay no matter what. So that would be things like light, heat, water, rent, mortgage, travel costs to get to work, food, clothing. You get the idea. Things that you cannot live your life without. Then we have discretionary costs, which are things like TV license, Netflix subscriptions, going to the gym, takeaways, eating out. Clothing falls across the middle line of the two. It's not always black and white, and it's different for different people. So once you've worked out what you're spending and what you have been spending, you break everything down into two columns: committed expense, discretionary expense. Now at that point, out of the total of what you've been spending so far, is there enough left over every month for you to put 10% away into a savings account? If the answer is no, and for most people who haven't really taken an active interest in their financial planning, the answer probably is no, to begin with, especially if you have no savings, etc. So what can you do? So the first thing to look at is not your discretionary expenses as you might expect. It's to look at your committed expenses. Are you paying more than you need to for your gas and electricity? Are you paying more than you need to for your mobile phone? Are you paying more than you need to for your mortgage? Could you get a better deal? Are you paying more than you need to for your life insurance? All of those sort of things. You go through all of your committed expenses, the things that you must pay, and see if you can save some money on those. Lots of online tools to help you. Once you've done that, sit down again, look at where you're at. Have you created enough wiggle room for you to put your 10% away every month, for you to pay yourself first? Once you get into the habit of paying yourself first, that literally is it. You pay yourself first, and that money is considered dead money. It's gone. It has to go every month. Once you've done that and you've got your committed expenditure down, if you still haven't got enough wiggle room, we need to start looking at discretionary expenditure. Discretionary expenditure is actually harder to trim back than committed expenditure is. Now that sounds counterintuitive, and everybody thinks that they can always cut out things out of their life. They won't buy takeaways, they won't go out for a meal, they won't take the kids to soft play once a week. There's lots of things. People just think they can go cold turkey on these things, they can strike them off their budget, or they pretend they were never in their budget in the first place, and that'll create the leeway to free their 10% up. In my experience, it doesn't work. It's never worked. Those discretionary spends are part of your lifestyle. They are habits. They are things that are difficult to stop, at least in the very long term. So it is much harder to trim back on them. But there are things you can do that work. Sorry, I'm going to try that. This is the strategy that I would recommend. And it might not work for you, but I think it works for most people. You take a weekly diet from these things. So, if you've identified in your budget that you spend X amount per month on things like takeaways, clothes, eating out, going to the gym, taking the kids to soft play, going to the cinema, things like that, things that you can actually not do that week. Take a week in your month, say week 1 of the month, we won't have any takeaways this week, and we won't spend anything more on the other things that we normally spend money on. Week 2, we'll have the takeaways again, the same as we would normally, but we won't go and do to the cinema this week. Week 3, we'll go to the cinema again if we normally go once a week, we will have our takeaways, but we've cut something else out. We won't buy any clothes this week. Week 4, and you do that in a cycle, so you're never truly cutting something out forever. You've only got to give it up for a week, and you put that money to one side. And that comes back to knowing your budget, knowing how much you've been spending on those things. So immediately you can portion that money away towards your 10% target of getting 10% of your income put away every month. So if you find, even once you have trimmed your committed expenses down as far as you possibly can, and you're going to pull back on your discretionary expenses as far as you possibly can, because at the end of the day you've got to enjoy your life. You can't just wipe everything out, but you still can't find 10% of your take-home income to put away every month, then fundamentally your finances are set up to fail in the long term. You essentially need at that point to look to increase your income. It's a deeply personal thing, this, how you can look at that, and it's very much personal circumstances, whether you can look for a promotion if you're in an employed position or look for an position somewhere else. If you're self-employed, obviously if you can increase the amount of money that you're making, either by charging existing customers more or finding more customers, whatever works for your business model. I'm not going to delve into that here because I think it's a lot easier said than done. But ultimately, if you can't find within your budget the ability to free up 10% income, I find it very difficult to see how in the long term you will move forward financially. You will repeat the same cycles over and over again unless you can find a way to get to that point where you're at least freeing up 10% of your income. So if you've managed to free up 10% of your income to put away every month, what we have now is we have a situation where what do you do with it? Initially, what you should be doing with your 10% income is building an emergency fund. If you've ever taken any sort of financial advice or any mortgage advice, you will find in the reports, if your advisor didn't actually talk about it in more detail with you, a recommendation that you have an emergency fund, a financial cushion if something happens and your income dries up, either because you're unable to work or you're made redundant or your company shuts down or the whole country shuts down because of a pandemic. There's a sort of example today that you should have an emergency fund. An emergency fund is money in a savings account, not your current account, set aside just to be touched in an emergency. And ideally, it should be enough to cover 3 months of your budgeted outgoings. Now, in the early days, maybe your target would be 3 months of your committed outgoings, because if you were absolutely desperate, I'm sure you could just cut all the discretionary stuff out for a period of time. But ideally, you want it to cover your full budget. So some people would actually just aim for 3 months income to keep it simple. Initially, what I would suggest that somebody did to build that up would be to use a regular saver account. These are accounts that look like they've got quite high interest, but they generally don't. You pay a set amount in every month and they'll give you a fixed interest. It creates a discipline of saving. The interest rate looks higher than it really is because the interest rate is only applied on the money as it hits. So say they're offering you 6% a year, it's not the same as 6% in an account where you can put the money in straight up front, because you're only getting it near the end because you've got to put it in bit by bit and it builds up. Or an instant access saver account. Either way, set up a standing order to make the payments every month. Now, once you hit the point that you've got 3 months minimum saved up is your emergency fund, you don't stop putting your 10% away. This is when you move on from trying to create financial stability towards trying to build long-term wealth. So once you get to that point, you start looking at things that are investments, not savings. Unless you're ultra cautious, then you might want to head towards getting 6 months worth of emergency fund rather than 3 months, or even 12 months if that's your personal mentality. It's important to remember that I don't know you, and we would make a different recommendation for every client that we meet about how long their emergency fund should last depending on their own financial position. But essentially, once you've filled up your emergency fund, then you can start looking to invest. The difference between a savings and an investment is, savings account, you give your money to a bank or an institution, they give you X amount of interest. Your money is there. It can not go down in value. It might not grow as fast as inflation, so the rate of return might actually be technically negative in what you can buy with the money, but the money is there. You put £1 in, when you want £1 out, there will be £1 there. With an investment, you put the money in, it's a much more long-term thing. You should never expect to take the money out with sort of even 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. It's a very long-term thing. You put the money in every month, but the pound you put in can go down in value, but it's also, over a longer term, more likely to go up in value faster than putting it on deposit would. There's different levels of risk involved with investments. I'm not going to go into that here. Again, it's important to remember I don't know you, so I don't know what your appropriate risk profile is. You should seek advice when you come to the stage that you're starting to invest. So anyway, you put the money into an investment to build up your long-term wealth. And that's basically the principle of pay yourself first, build up an emergency fund, and build up wealth. And you'll find as time goes on, as you increase your 10%, as you put your 10% away, as you get older, your income increases, you start to earn more, your expenses go down as the kids grow up and leave home, in theory, and you can put more and more money away, and it becomes a snowball effect. The money that you've put away begins to earn more money, and your wealth starts to build more rapidly. Now, I hope that's of remotely interest or use to some people out there. If there's anything else you'd like me to discuss, or you have any questions about that, feel free to send me a message via whatever platform you saw this video. Feel free to inbox the message if you don't want to use the comment section. Obviously, I'm very well aware that finances are a deeply personal thing. So anyway, thanks for listening. Stay safe. Speak soon.